He actually waited 4 days before calling, 2 days longer than I thought. I listened as his smooth voice oozed through the phone. Tom, please be reasonable. I'm sure we can work out an agreement we're all happy with. Why don't you come by the office? We'll sit and discuss it like reasonable men. That's a great idea, Stan. I already know what I want. He hated being called Stan, always insisting on Stanley. I heard his irritated his, but he controlled it. That's just great, Tom. I do admire a reasonable man. What do you want? We'll have it ready when you come over. I want your daughter to honor the prenup as written. Nothing else is acceptable. Understand me, Stan. And as for coming over, it'll be a cold day in hell before I walk back into that place you call home. His control slipped, his good humor gone. You low-class jerk. I told her you were a gold digger, but would she listen? No. Now I'm going to have to clean up her mess just like I did when she was in college. You'll regret this, you miserable redneck. He was practically screaming by the end. Stan, are you threatening me? I'm hurt, Stan. I always thought highly of you. I was laying it on thick. We had hated each other from the moment we met. He couldn't speak for a minute, then exploded. I'm going to make one more attempt to be reasonable. $1 million after taxes, and you can divorce her right after the election. I let a few seconds pass before answering. $1 million. Gee, let me think about that. Hell no. Not happening. Stanley, old boy. You have a nice day now. Gaterin. Feel free to call anytime. He was still screaming when I hung up. The man was delusional. His career was gone, his loving family likely destroyed, and about to be vilified by everyone with an opinion. The genie was out of the bottle, and he was still trying to make deals to fix it. I immediately sent 3 copies of what I had recorded off to safe places. I couldn't be too careful. He was wasting his efforts anyway. The wheels of justice were already turning, and nothing he could do would stop them now. I met her when I was laying cable by her house. I was a subcontractor with my own equipment. Everyone was switching to fiber optic and buried cables. They were faster, cheaper, and best of all, being underground. They weren't susceptible to weather. Barring earthquakes, floods, or a careless homeowner, they were practically indestructible. The company I worked for had gotten permission from the state to use their right-of-way. For a fee, of course. I was in front of a house that was the largest in the neighborhood. Multi-million-dollar homes, tall gates, a circular driveway. Expensive cars were parked haphazardly around, and it was obvious there was a party going on. I could hear music booming through my headphones, even over the sound of my machinery. It was an April afternoon, half of the time of year. I had taken my shirt off, trying to catch some sun before the weather really heated up. I didn't go to a gym or tanning beds, but working 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week kept me in terrific shape. I stopped to reload my cable spool and looked over at the house. There was a stunning brunette standing on the balcony in a small bikini, the smallest I'd ever seen. If it hadn't been black, I would have sworn she was wearing nothing at all. She swayed back and forth, and then, suddenly, tumbled over the railing. I didn't believe my eyes for a moment. Then I ran across the yard. I found her in the bushes under the balcony. She was scratched up pretty badly, and clearly very drunk. She couldn't even stand. When I picked her up, she screamed, unable to bear weight on her feet. I set her back down gently and checked her over. Her left ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, and she moaned when I touched it. I made her as comfortable as I could and went to the front door. I rang the bell and knocked, but no one answered. The fence made it impossible to go around the house. I returned to her, thinking she might be able to call someone inside. She was still too intoxicated to talk, and her ankle was turning purple. I sighed and picked her up. I put her in my truck, quickly noting the address. 15 minutes later, I carried her through the emergency room doors. I set her down gently and walked to the desk. The staff had been watching me walk in. What happened to her? The nurse at the desk asked, handing me a clipboard. She fell off a balcony. I think she broke her ankle, and I'm pretty sure she's drunk." Another nurse went off to check her while the others handed me a clipboard. "Her name here, your name there, type of insurance, relationship, medical history." It was pretty self-explanatory. I pushed it back. "I don't know her name, and I'm not giving you mine. I saw her fall off a balcony at a house I was working in front of. No one was home. She was in obvious distress, so I brought her here. I can give you the address. She'll tell you who she is and who to call when she sobers up, I'm sure." I lied about the party, and I'm not sure why. Probably to make the story sound more urgent and to get her taken care of faster. The nurse at the desk frowned and tried to get me to sign. "What's going to happen, lady? I don't mind helping her, but I won't be responsible for her. Judging by the house, her family has a few dollars to spare. You shouldn't have a problem getting paid. Now, are you going to treat her or what?" She grumbled but didn't have much of a choice. I sat with her until they took her back, then left. The last thing I wanted was to be a designated babysitter for some rich kid. When I got back to my equipment, I noticed her driveway. All the cars were gone, except for a small Mercedes parked up front. It was too late to get any more work done, so I packed up my machine onto the trailer. I wrestled with the idea, but figured someone needed to know what had happened. I walked up the driveway and knocked on the door. A really attractive woman who resembled the girl opened it. I assumed it was her older sister, but I found out quickly it was her mother. She was 42 at the time, but looked like she was in her early 30s. Her eyes were cool. "Can I help you?" "No, ma'am, but you can help someone else. I was working in front of your house earlier today and saw a woman fall off your balcony. I think she hurt her ankle pretty badly, so I took her to the Yard Methodist. I felt like someone needed to know she was too hurt to think straight." "Oh my God," she cried, running to her car. She peeled out of the driveway, leaving me standing there with the front door wide open. Rich folks are a strange bunch, I thought as I closed the door and made sure it was locked. I'd lost half a day and was on a tight schedule, so I was back bright and early on Saturday, working a 12-hour shift to finish my portion of the job. I glanced at the house a few times, debating whether to check on the girl, but there were no cars in the driveway, so I left. 5 weeks went by and I had mostly forgotten about it when someone knocked on my door. There were 2 women standing there, one on crutches. I didn't make the connection. I ran my business out of my home, so I thought they might be potential customers. "Can I help you ladies with something?" The older one smiled and said in a light voice, "Yes, you can invite us in and let us thank you." I moved out of the doorway and motioned for them to come in. "Thank me for what?" The younger one actually laughed. "He doesn't remember us, Mom. I'd think watching me fall would have made a bigger impact on you." Recognition dawned on me. "Balcony girl." She smiled. "In the flesh, and my name is Eve. This is my mom, Greta. We came by to thank you for helping me." I sat them down and got them both a soft drink. "You're welcome. How's the ankle mending?" "I broke it in 2 places. My tennis days are over, I'm afraid. Good thing I was so out of it when I fell, or I would have been hurt a lot worse." Her mother drew in a sharp breath. "Relax, Mother, it's the truth, and you both know it." She turned back to me. "I wanted to come by earlier, but between my ankle and the counseling I've been doing, I didn't have the chance. I wanted to thank you for helping me and making me realize where my life was headed." Her mother looked uncomfortable. "Eve, I really don't think you should burden Mr. Y with details of your life." But Eve overruled her mother. "No, Mom, I want to tell him." She looked back at me. "Your help gave me a wake-up call. There were over 30 people in my house when I fell, and not one of them came looking for me. Mom ran them all out when she got home. She didn't know I was hurt until you knocked on her door. When they treated me at the hospital, besides the broken ankle, I had a concussion, a blood alcohol level of 0.17, just under poisoning, and they found a mild STD. When I woke up in the hospital, I had no idea how I got there, what was wrong with me, or how long I'd been out. Mom had been there for hours filling out forms when I came to. She paused. Mom didn't want me to tell you all this, but it's important to me that you know. I want you to understand the kind of person I have become. I couldn't move for 10 days because I was in traction, and it gave me a lot of time to think. I started serious counseling, just short of rehab. I learned a lot about myself, things I didn't want to learn. But I'm trying to change, to be better, and it took the kindness of a stranger to set me on that path. That, sir, is what I wanted to thank you for. I looked at the two women. They sat there as if they expected me to say something. All I can say is, you're welcome. Everything would have done the same, and I'm glad you've decided to be a better person. We could all use a few more of those. Just out of curiosity, how did you find me? I didn't give anyone any information at the hospital, and your mom and I never exchanged names. For the first time, she giggled. I was wearing your shirt, remember? Something else I need to thank you for. That bikini didn't cover much now, did it? Not much at all, as a matter of fact. A thong bottom, and every time you moved, one or both breasts popped free of the top, I said, chuckling. I had a clean shirt with my company logo and contact information in one of the storage boxes on my trailer. T-shirts are walking billboards, and I'd gotten several jobs because of them. For that reason, I always carried 3 or 4 to give away. I got a 3X out and slid her into it. It went well down her thighs and preserved her modesty. I grinned. Yeah, I forgot about that. You're welcome. Her smile widened. It's become my favorite sleeping attire. She and her mother stood. Well, we won't keep you. Thanks again. She was almost at the door when she stopped. Oh yes, I almost forgot. My dad wants you to have dinner with us. Saturday, 7 sharp. I'm sure you remember where the house is. They were both shocked when I declined. I'm sorry, ladies. I have a commitment Saturday evening. I just can't break. But thank you for the offer. Both stood with their mouths open in shock. Finally, Greta spoke. Do you know who my husband is? No, ma'am. I don't even know your last name. Eve giggled. It's Wallace. My dad's name is Stanley Wallace, as in Stanley Wallace, Speaker of the State House. Sure you won't reconsider? As gracious as the invitation is, what I have to do is time-sensitive and can't be postponed. Perhaps another time with a bit more advance notice. Greta stood in shock while Eve was laughing. Mom, can I tell Dad? He's not going to be happy. He doesn't take disappointment well. Eve took my hand. Thanks again for everything. Maybe we can have dinner another time. I find you fascinating. I'll give you plenty of advance notice, I promise. Before I could react, she leaned in, kissed my cheek, and hopped into the car. I watched them drive away, thinking how strange it all was. I could still smell her perfume lingering on my cheek. It was pleasant. I was rattling around in the garage, loading what I needed for where I was going when a convertible Mustang pulled into the drive. The door swung open and I heard her voice. Can I get a little help? It was Eve. I helped her out and handed her the crutches. I apologize. I don't want to make you late for your plans. I meant to be here sooner but got delayed. I'd like to try again. Would you join my parents and me for lunch next Saturday? Please. What could it hurt? I accept your invitation. Tell me a time, and I'll be there. And just for clarification, I don't have a date tonight. I said I had something time-sensitive to do. She sat and watched me load up while we talked. This time-sensitive thing, can I come along? I looked at her, thinking, I don't think so. I don't think you'd enjoy it, and then I'd be obligated to entertain you, which I wouldn't enjoy. Please. I knew I was making a mistake. All right. We'll most likely be out all night. You still want to come? There was a glint in her eye. You're not going to hurt me, are you? Then yes, I'd love to accompany you. She made it sound like we were going to the opera. Call your mom. Tell her you won't be home until much later. She seemed surprised. I'm 22 years old. I don't need to call and get permission. I don't expect you to. I was thinking more along the lines of being thoughtful so she wouldn't worry. She looked like the concept was foreign to her, but she called. Mom, hi. I'm with Mr. I. I'll be with him most of the night. Didn't want you to worry. What? All right. She handed the phone to me. Thank you, Mr. E. I think this is the first time she's called me about her plans since she was 16. Were you taking her? I'm not going to spoil the surprise. Nice to say it's quiet, off the beaten path, and completely safe. Well, try to have a good time. My daughter can be distracting at times. I stopped at a Walmart on the way out of town to pick a few things up. I wouldn't be long. Back in 15 minutes, I tossed the bags in the back of the truck. It took almost an hour to get there. The city lights long behind us. It seemed to magnify the stars. I turned up a driveway and stopped in front of a typical farmhouse for the area whiteboard black shutters. An older man, slender and spry for his age, came to the door. Hi, Uncle John. Just checking in. Anybody else here yet? Are you coming up? Ron and Cassie in the Uranus. Bob came. Junie couldn't make it. Fred, Celeste, and the kids. Most of the gang is up there already. No, I'm staying in. Getting too old for this. I couldn't help but notice a car parked discreetly in the back. Too old, or maybe got a better offer. I raised my voice. How are you tonight, Marie? A voice came from inside the house. Fair to Midland, Tommy. Now why don't you go on up and stop teasing your uncle? We've got unfinished business. Uncle John stood there blushing, and I told him to have a good night. I climbed back into the truck before he started asking about my companion. We drove up the hill, stopping at the edge of a large meadow. 2 fires were burning, and I could smell a grill going. 8 kids were roaming around the tents that had been set up. What are we doing here? Eve asked. We came here to see a show, but it doesn't start for a few hours. Come on, I'll introduce you. Everyone was curious about her. I had never brought a woman before, and you could see the speculation in their eyes. Celeste fostered me, saying we had almost missed dinner. Soon, we had a plate of burgers, potato salad, and baked beans in front of us. I was surprised to see Eve clean her plate. They got into a conversation about fashion and beauty products, and I took this as a sign to leave them alone and let the interrogation begin. I had warned everyone not to tell her what we were all doing here. I could tell it frustrated her to no end. She was clearly used to getting her way. After about 2 hours, Ron called out, "Almost time. Folks, get ready." I startled Eve by jokingly telling her to take off her clothes. "What?" she exclaimed, startled. Celeste laughed as I handed her the bags I had picked up at Walmart. "Come on, honey, let's get into my tent so you can change." It was the last week of May, and the air was chilly where we were. Eve was definitely underdressed in her finned t-shirt and jeans, staying close to the fire for warmth. I had bought her 2 sweatsuits and a pair of thick socks, guessing her size to be a medium. While she was changing, I set up the air mattress and sleeping bag on my platform. Over the years, we found it much more comfortable to use raised platforms. It made sleeping easier and saved us from waking up with sore necks. Celeste brought Eve back to me, now dressed in the sweatsuit with her hair tied back in a ponytail. "I'm sure she appreciated your foresight," Celeste teased. Despite the baggy clothes, Eve still looked amazing. "If you don't tell me what's going on, I'm going to explode. This isn't some sort of cult, is it?" Eve asked, half joking, but clearly uneasy. I grinned. "That's right, we're all star worshippers. Now lie down. Nothing bad will happen, just watch." She was still nervous, so she lay on the mattress as far away from me as possible. We lay there for about 15 minutes before Eve became impatient. "How long are we going to lie here?" "Most of the night." "Now hush, you said you wanted to come, so be still. The show should start any minute." Sure enough, 5 minutes later, a vivid meteor swept across the sky. "Did you see that?" she asked in a small, excited voice. "Yes, it's the awkward meteor storm. If we're lucky, we'll see 3 or 4 dozen. That's why we were there. far enough away from the city to escape light pollution. We were an informal astronomy club, mostly family, meeting whenever the conditions were perfect for stargazing. The air had gotten cooler, so I suggested time to slip into the back. "Don't worry, you're safe with me." She flipped into the sleeping bag with a little snicker, snuggling closer against me. In a playful whisper, she teased, "Yes, but who's going to keep you safe from me?" It was hard to focus with her lying so close, her warmth and presence distracting me. Just as I was about to give up on trying to stargaze, I felt a gentle tug on the back of my shirt. It was Amy, the 6-year-old daughter of Fred and Celeste. "Uncle Tommy, can I get in with you? Buddy and Jimmy are acting up, and I can't sleep." I tousled her here. "It's fine with me, baby, but I have a guest. If she says it's okay, climb in." With her best baby voice, Amy asked Eve, "Please, Miss Eve, I don't wiggle much, and I won't make any noise." Eve's heart melted. Soon, Eve went out, and the rising sun woke me up. I looked over and saw Eve and Amy snuggled together, Amy's little head resting on each shoulder. Celeste was standing there, grinning and holding a camera. She put her hands to her lips, and I slipped out quietly, following her back to the picnic table where some others were preparing breakfast. She scrolled through the pictures she had taken, stopping at one she liked best. "Here's what you'll look like as a family man." "Cute, huh?" she said. In the picture, we were all snuggled together. Eve was in my arms, and Amy was on top of us, her cheek resting just below Eve's chin. It was endearing. I used the portable shower we had set up, made from 55-gallon drums, fiberglass, and heated by gas. You were allowed 20 gallons of fresh water pumped from a nearby spring. After dressing, I went back to the tables where Eve was up, and Amy was sitting on her lap. Amy, the youngest of 4 and the only girl, often had to fight for attention. I showed Amy the bathhouse and explained it to her, giving her a fresh sweatsuit. "Sorry, I didn't get any undies," I said with a grin. Not to be outdone, she grinned back. "That's all right. I kind of like going commando." Amy, not fully understanding the conversation, surprised us all by wanting to shower with Eve. She emerged giggling, and when her mom asked what she was laughing about, she leaned close to answer, "Me and Miss Eve are going commando. We don't have panties on." She said it loud enough for a few to hear, and Eve glowed for a few minutes while she brushed Amy's hair. Breakfast was soon served, and we ate as a group, familiar with each other after years of sheer experiences. Eve told them how we met, mentioning that she slipped and fell off her balcony while I happened to be working there. By the time she was done, you would have thought I performed the ankle surgery by myself. Amy was enchanted, showing her admiration in the way only a child could. She came out with what was on her mind, saying, "You know, if you and Uncle Tommy got married, you'd be my aunt. How cool would that be?" Eve gently explained, "It would be very cool, sweetie. I might just marry him to spend more time with you, but he has to ask me first. We're not that far along yet. But he's already passed the sleeping together test. He doesn't snore, and he doesn't hog the blankets like someone else did last night." Amy puffed up and protested, "I do not snore." Eve responded, "Yes, you do, baby. You snore like a cute little puppy." This made Amy feel a bit better, especially when Eve said she could call her Eve. When Amy asked if Eve could come back and watch the stars with them again, Eve looked at me. "I'd love to, sweetie, but that's up to Uncle Tommy. If he says I can, I will." He came up to me and tugged my beard, saying, "Can you come back next time? Please, Uncle Tommy." I looked at Eve, who seemed a bit anxious. "If she says yes when I ask her, I'd love it, Amy." Celeste and Eve smiled like it was a done deal. I made a mental note to keep my sister-in-law in check. She seemed to take it personally that I remained unmarried. Eve took another shower when we got to my house and emerged dressed in the jeans and t-shirt she had on yesterday, her hair and makeup perfect. Noticing my frown, she asked, "What's wrong?" I replied, "You're a really attractive woman." Why do you wear so much makeup and hide your beautiful face? Her eyes seemed to tear up. Before I could react, she gave me a very nice kiss and said that's one of the sweetest things a man has ever said to me. Thank you. As she headed to her car, I helped her get situated. This cast comes off next week, then a month of physical therapy, and I'm supposed to be as good as new. Thank you for last night. It was one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had. I'd love to go again if you want me to. After all, we wouldn't want to disappoint a 6-year-old. She took my phone, punched in her number, told me to call, and left. I thought about her all week but didn't call. We lived in different worlds. I did some research and found that her family was wealthy. She had a trust fund from her maternal grandfather, and the family wealth was estimated just below $50 million, way out of my league. I received a sharp call on Thursday evening. Why haven't you called me? Never mind. I'm just reminding you about lunch on Saturday. My dad hates to wait. She hung up before I could reply. I thought about driving my work truck, but chose my MG instead, a small British sports car I had restored over 4 years. Despite its small engine, it was surprisingly fast and agile. When I arrived, Eve was waiting at the door. Nice car, she said, and added, you clean up very well. I had gone to my barber that morning. Celeste, my sister-in-law, was a successful stylist, and when she heard I was dining with Eve, she insisted I get a trim. She fussed over me for 45 minutes before saying, you need to lose that beard. It makes you look 37, not 27. I wore a nice button-up shirt and casual slacks, about as dressed up as I wanted to get. When Eve met me at the door, I reached into my car for a bouquet of flowers. Oh, you shouldn't have, she said, reaching for them. I told her they were for her mother, and her smile turned cool. I let it linger before pulling out another bouquet. This one is for you. Her smile returned as she leaned in and whispered, they're lovely. Thank you. If you can be that thoughtful, maybe you can learn how to use a phone. It's simple if you can read. Go to Contacts, find Eve, and hit the button. It even dials for you. Before I could respond, we were through the door. Her parents were waiting in the foyer. The gift of flowers was unexpected, and she seemed genuinely happy to receive them. Her father, at 64, towered over my 5 feet 11 inches. He was in good shape, maintaining it with his home gym and regular workouts. As we sized each other up, the room seemed to shrink. We were like two dominant figures, each looking for an opportunity to assert themselves. It surprised me since I usually didn't react this way. He was known for trying to intimidate people with his size and strength, and his firm handshakes were almost legendary. I knew what was coming when he extended his hand. With a good grip and strong muscles from handling equipment and lifting heavy rolls of cable, he tried to squeeze my hand, but I squeezed back just a bit harder. It caught him by surprise. I saw his eyes widen momentarily before narrowing with irritation. Even others were expecting me to react like everyone else did and rub my hand, but I simply let go and continued with the conversation. They looked at him, and he shrugged. Later, I learned he had told them he had gone easy on me for Eve. Lunch was delicious, and I was on my best behavior. He didn't stay long, citing pressing business. He thanked me for helping his daughter, and I believe he genuinely meant it. It felt like a weight lifted when he left. Greta commented that while he might be intense at first, he really is a good man. She said it like she was used to defending him, but I found him quite interesting. They looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Then Greta smiled and said, interesting, what an apt description. They took me on a tour of the house, which included 7 bedrooms, a large pool house, and a heated pool. It was clear how the wealthy lived. I thanked the cook for an excellent lunch when I saw the kitchen. I don't think she received many compliments. Eve had made a slideshow of the photos Celeste took, including a few of the meteors. She paused on one of us snuggled together. Greta remarked, such a nice picture. I hope in the not-too-distant future I get an opportunity to enjoy some grandchildren. Eve laughed and kissed her cheek. Relax, Mom. I'm only 22. I need to find someone I like well enough to have children with first. Don't rush me into that role just yet. We had a pleasant afternoon. As I was leaving, Greta sent Eve to fetch some of the dessert we enjoyed earlier. Once Eve was out of earshot, Greta started talking. I want to thank you again for looking after my daughter in more ways than one. It wasn't lost on her that a stranger took care of her while her friends continued to party. She told me she had the best time when you took her to see the meteors. Tommy, I want you to be careful around her. You come from different worlds, and I don't want either of you to get hurt. Before I could respond, Eve returned. She insisted I take her for a ride in my car. We spent a pleasant couple of hours drifting around. She had me stop in an empty parking lot before we returned. Why are we stopping here? I asked. So I can do this, she replied, kissing me passionately. My earlier reservations went out the window as we kissed for about 10 minutes before she pulled back. We need to stop or get naked, and I don't think my dad would want to see his daughter arrested in a school parking lot. As we headed home, I thought it would be great if phones had a feature to help us outlast each other. I lasted until Tuesday before calling her. She answered on the first ring. I was giving you one more day. You just made it. Wanted to do something tonight? She asked. Sorry, Eve, I have to work tomorrow. I just wanted to hear your voice and say hi. Are you at home? Yes and no. I'm in for the night, she replied before hanging up. I tried calling back, but only reached voicemail. 25 minutes later, her car pulled into the driveway. I helped her out and carried the ice cream she had brought. She looked helpless, despite being on the mend. What are you doing? She asked with a smile. You're not going out, so I have to come to you now. Give me the remote and scoop the ice cream. Since I came out here, I get to pick the movie, she said. She chose a chick flick on Netflix, which I actually enjoyed. I had to get her a drink and another bowl of ice cream, and then help her to the bathroom. I hated pausing movies, having lived alone and gotten out of the habit, but the company made it worth the interruptions. By the end, she was misty-eyed, snuggled to my shoulder with her hand firmly in mine. We talked afterwards. She had just graduated college with a degree in art. I surprised her by showing my prints of Starry Night and sunflowers. I really like Monet and Manet, but not as much as Van Gogh. I'm a fan of American artists like Whistler, O'Keeffe, and Rockwell when I want something uplifting. I also appreciate Remington sculptures. She looked at me, astonished. We discussed art and other topics until midnight. As she was leaving, she asked if I had a good suit. Good, we're going somewhere special on Friday, she said. I think you tensed up. Sorry if that sounded off. If you're not busy, the Art Museum in the Capitol is having a small event. There's a traveling exhibit of Monet's works. The grand opening is Saturday, a preview for sponsors and invited guests. Our family is always represented, and this year it's my turn. It would be nice to go with someone who actually understands what I'm talking about. Please come with me. I couldn't resist saying yes, and she knew it. Next time we date, you pick. If you can top our last outing, I'll be suitably impressed. Before I could respond, she gave me one more kiss and left. I called Celeste and she arranged for me to get a presentable suit for Friday night. She insisted we use my car, which led to my first experience with valet parking. Don't worry, they won't damage it, she said, laughing at my reaction. Your car will be well taken care of. These people are professionals. Now, let's mingle. At the event, I recognized many influential figures in our state and found most of them pleasant. Eve introduced me to a woman in her late 50s, and we discussed whether Van Gogh had committed suicide or if he had been accidentally shot by teenagers. A few minutes later, I noticed Eve was no longer with me. Feeling guilty, I searched the room and found her engaged in conversation with two men. When she rejoined me, she seemed to sense my jealousy. Who are you talking to? I asked, trying to mask my feelings. Just an ex-boyfriend or two, she said with a smile. Did you like Vivian? She's very sharp and looks familiar. Is she married to someone in the public eye? Yes, her husband is the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. She was a formidable attorney and has a reputation for being tough. Eve explained. Wow, I thought she was just a nice lady, I said. She is sweet, Eve replied. When approached, kissed me on the cheek and thanked me. I've been called many things in my career, but that was one of the nicest, she said. She then invited us to dinner in the future and gave me a card with her contact information. Photographers were taking pictures for the papers and state magazines. Eve was thrilled, and we were featured on the cover of both the art and social sections of the Sunday papers. The art section labeled me as a local critic based on a comment Vivian had made. The photos captured our interactions, including the kiss. The society page featured us with important people and speculated about our relationship. Eve told Celeste that if anyone asked, she would identify me as her boyfriend, which made me smile. We started spending a lot of time together. She visited my house 2 or 3 times a week, and we went out every weekend. I was falling in love, but also grappling with our different worlds. Despite this, I never tried to end things. Celeste and Eve became friends to the extent that when Eve wanted to take Amy on a date with us, Celeste agreed. It was my turn to choose the outing, and I picked the State Symphony. Eve arranged for tickets through her family's patronage. Eve picked up Amy and Celeste the day before, taking Amy shopping for a dress. Celeste later said it made her uncomfortable, as she wasn't used to many of the shops they visited. Amy ended up with 3 dresses instead of 1, and Eve covered the expenses, reminding Celeste it was her treat. They had lunch at a nice tea room Eve frequented. Amy hadn't told me who would be joining us, only that it was someone dear to her. Celeste and Amy arrived an hour before we were due to leave. Eve immediately took Amy into the guest room, leaving Celeste and me. Has she told you yet? Celeste asked, smiling as she adjusted my tie. As who told me what? I replied, trying to get my tie straight. Eve came over to help with my tie. She's in love with you, Celeste said, and you're in love with her. Don't try to argue. I see the way you look at her. She's perfect, beautiful, and in love with you. It doesn't get any better. I sighed. She's way out of my league. All I can offer her is me in a lower middle-class lifestyle. She might get bored quickly. No, Celeste said, smoothing my tie. Even if you love her, it's not doomed from the start. Amy appeared at that moment, looking stunning in a kneeling little black dress and simple pearls. She and Eve twirled for us, while Celeste took photos. How do we look, Uncle Tommy? Amy asked. You and Eve look beautiful, I said, scooping her up. Now, shall we go? After kisses and hugs, Celeste went back home, telling me to bring her back after lunch tomorrow. With a tear in her eye, she said, you two look perfect together. I can't wait to see how beautiful your children will be. Have a good night. Heads turned when we entered the hall. Amy insisted on walking between us, holding our hands. I was concerned she might get bored, but she was enthralled by the music. We had front row seats, and during intermission, the maestro came over to chat with Eve and asked Amy if she was enjoying the evening. She said yes and requested an autograph, which pleased him greatly. After the intermission, he mentioned the pieces they would be performing next and singled out Amy. The spotlight was turned on us, and he announced, ladies and gentlemen, here is the future of classical music. This is Miss Amy, and this next piece is dedicated to you. Amy received a round of applause and became a dedicated fan of classical music. After the concert, Eve took Amy backstage to meet the musicians. Most of them signed a poster of the orchestra for her, and she received 2 CDs. She insisted we play them on the way home, and fell asleep before we arrived. I carried her into the guest room, and Eve helped her into pajamas. Amy woke just enough to ask for goodnight kisses from both of us. As Eve left, Amy asked, "Are you in love with Eve?" I brushed her hair and replied, "I am. Can you keep a secret?" She giggled and said, "Mom says you'll be my real aunt soon." That makes me happy. Tell Eve I love her too." She fell back asleep quickly. That night, Eve and I made love. When I came out of the guest room, I couldn't find Eve. Her car was still in the driveway, so I knew she hadn't left. I called out softly, and her answer came from my bedroom. "Come to bed, honey," she said. She was standing by the bed in a gown that was both alluring and modest. "I promised Amy we have breakfast together," I said. "If we lay down, we'll end up making love. I know it would never last, and I see heartbreak ahead." She snuggled up to me. What started as a simple goodnight kiss quickly became intense. We made slow, sensual love rather than having a passionate encounter. It was beautiful. Afterward, she cleaned up in the bathroom and put her gown back on. "Put your bottoms on," she said, smiling. "A little girl will wake before us, and come in here. Get dressed." As we lay together, just before I fell asleep, she whispered, "So this is what married life with children is like." I could get used to this, although an occasional trip to the grandparents would be a must. I want 3 kids. Good night. I woke up feeling unexpectedly disappointed. I realized I was alone, which I didn't like. I went into the kitchen and found a note. "Good morning, sleepyhead. You missed breakfast. The girls had some errands to run. Amy is staying again tonight, and we had to pick up a few things. Meet us at Mom's at 3 o'clock. I did some chores around the house, then drove over. They were in the pool wearing matching yellow swimsuits. Amy climbed out, gave me a big hug and soaked me. Eve followed, drenching me even more. You were going to end up wet anyway. Your suit is in the pool house. Hurry up so I change," and we played in the pool until dinner time. Eve and I linked hands and threw Amy as far as we could, hearing her laughter until she hit the water. Amy insisted we do the same for Greta. I think it was the first time I ever heard her laugh. Amy was so worn out she had to have a nap before dinner. Eve put her in her old room and came back with a surprise announcement. "Sorry, but you get to spend the night alone. Mom, Amy, and I are having a pajama party. She's sleeping here tonight. Celeste knows. Now, do you want dinner, or would you rather go home and see how loud I can get?" We tried our best to challenge each other, and we pretty well succeeded. She was vocal, not ashamed to tell me what she wanted. We fell back, sweaty and exhausted. "I have to go now. Love, Amy and Mom are expecting me. I can think of nothing I want more than to stay in your arms, but we have the rest of our lives to do that. I'll see you tomorrow. Pick us up around 1. I lay back as she showered and left. My house had never felt so empty, so we became an official couple. Eve spent more and more time with me and moved clothes until we had to put some in the spare bedroom. I woke up one day and realized she had been there for 3 weeks without going home once. I asked her about it. She kissed me and said, "I am home, silly." We lived together for another month or 2 before we had our first serious discussion about our future. Amy had become like a surrogate daughter, spending about 1 weekend every 3 weeks with us. I watched them bond. One night after Amy was in bed and Eve was snuggled up to me on the couch, she turned to me and said, "I want a baby." "What?" I stirred. "I'm sorry, that came out wrong. I want to have your baby, our baby. We love each other. It's time for us to make future plans." This was the talk I was dreading. "I love you too, more than I can say, but we're so different. You walk through doors I could never open. You have more money than I'll ever make. Sooner or later, you would miss your old world. Then where would we be in a bitter fight that I lose over my children? I don't think you'll be satisfied with me." I wasn't expecting her response. She slapped me so hard I fell off the couch. She rushed into our bedroom and came out dressed in one of her old gowns and went into Amy's room. They were both gone when I got up a little after noon. She came back, and I came out to meet her. She slapped me again, just as hard. I love you and this is what you think. I'm just a shallow rich girl out for a lark. Damn you straight to hell, Tommy. I'm going back to Mom's for a while. Think about what you want, And just so you know, if I had known you felt like this, I would have given every dime away to keep you. I never thought I'd say this to you, but you're an idiot." She jumped back into her car, and I didn't see her for 3 weeks. Talk about a backlash. I became an instant a hole to my family, her family, and all our friends. Amy refused to speak to me. It isn't often a Supreme Court justice calls you advise you on your love life. I know now how she earned her reputation. In simple legal terms, there is no law against being a fool, but I'm looking for a loophole so I can sentence you to make it up to her. The poor girl came to me trying to get me to help her get rid of her wealth so she could be with you. I've always respected you, Tommy. You're honest, forthright, a fine young man. Don't make me think less of you because you won't listen to your heart. Go to her. She'll take you back in an instant. Please, Tommy. I thought about it for a few days, then did some shopping and made some plans. I called Greta and asked if I could come by. She wasn't happy. Are you sure you want to see her? You know my husband hates you, but even he isn't happy about the breakup. She's just now stopped crying. I warned you not to hurt her, but you didn't listen. You made her fall in love with you anyway. I was so proud of her and was getting used to the idea of grandchildren in the near future. I begged and pleaded and finally convinced her. She got Eve to answer the door when I came over. She wasn't expecting me, and she gasped when she saw me on my knees. I'm here to beg you back into my life. I'll do anything. Please give me another chance. Every resource I'll ever have from this moment, I will be used to make sure you have a happy life. Please, Eve, forgive me. Oh, and if you do, will you marry me? I held out the ring, not daring to look up. After a few seconds, I couldn't stand the suspense, and looked up. She wasn't there. Well, I had given it my best. Greta caught me before I got to the truck. Vivian was right. You were a fool. Get in the house right this second. I have a hysterical daughter on my hands, and you're going to fix it. She tried to look stern, but a smile leaked out. When I entered, she was in the foyer and pounced on me so hard we both fell. She was trying to kiss me and talk at the same time. I love you. Kiss. Marry. Kiss. Ring. Kiss. Now. I pulled it back out of my pocket. She slipped it on and looked at me. I'm making you a promise in front of my mom and God. This ring will remain on my finger for as long as I live. Her father was furious. I forbid this. He's a low-class opportunist. All he wants is your money. You are not to marry him. Is that clear? If he expected her to give in easily, he was mistaken. I wasn't there, but Greta told me about it later. It's not up to you. I'm of age and not dependent on you. You don't have to approve of him as long as I do. Be warned if you try to coerce him in any way or try to intimidate him. I will leave whether I marry him or not. And if I go, so does your campaign funding. I didn't know for a long time, but he always received sizable donations, and even a loan or two from her trust fund during election time. Losing that money would be hard to make up. She didn't actually gain control of the money until she was 25, but she did meet regularly with her financial advisors, who were very sensitive to her wishes, partly to keep the money with them. When she gained full control, her grandfather had wisely kept her father away from any access to the trust. He wouldn't let it go and tried everything he could to break us up. It was hard because all I ever did was go to work and come home to Eve. When he tried to set me up with a woman at a company picnic one of my employers held, it was the last straw. It was so obvious that was pathetic. No one knew who she was or who invited her, and when she started following me around, I lost it. Eve couldn't come. She worked with several charities and was at a budget retreat. I got a friend who was filming his kids to get a few good shots of her. She was dressed attractively, but conservatively, and made it a point to be near me, brushing up against me slightly at every opportunity. I acted like I was interested and proposed we slip into a secluded gazebo for conversation. She had her dress adjusted before we sat down. I hit the video app on my phone. I'm sure you've got someone recording this, so you don't mind if I do it too, Do you? I motioned to my friend who had come out of the trees with his camera. A second opinion. She looked frightened. Now adjust your dress properly and listen to me. You tell Stan this has officially stopped being funny. I'm not joking around anymore. Ask him how it would look if the press found out he was using people to try and block my marriage to his daughter. If he's willing to do that, what has he done in the past to get what he wants? I don't have a lot, but I'll make it my business to try and find out. Take that message to him. She denied everything, of course, then threatened to tell if I tried to seduce her if I didn't keep quiet. If you didn't know her dad, how did you know her name? If I were you, I'd quit while you're behind. Go back to Stan and say it didn't work. By now, I showed Eve the video, including the tag number of the car she was driving. It was traced back to a rental company, and the woman was traced back to an escort service. A few discreet phone calls later, we had the owner of the escort service. Apparently, she and Stan had a history. When I told Eve, she went ballistic. He was in the Capitol at work when he got the call. You miserable person. Screw you. You are not invited to the wedding or the reception. Don't call, don't come to see me. If you're very lucky, I'll send you a picture of your grandchildren every year or so. And you better start networking, because your campaign funds just dried up. Maybe I'll call the local papers and talk about what a loving father you are. Maybe play a little video for them. It shook him pretty badly. It took 3 weeks of apologizing to calm her down, which increased his hatred of me. He insisted strongly on a prenuptial agreement, and for once I agreed with him. I thought we'd have a good time together. We don't need this. We're going to be together forever. I know you wouldn't hurt me. I talked her into it. It's just a piece of paper, honey. We'll never use it, and it will make everyone more comfortable. More importantly to me, it'll send a strong message that I love you, not your money. Her dad had his lawyers draw it up and send it to the lawyer I used for business. He redacted for me. He called me when he got it. Have you read it? No, but just tell me what it says. He sighed. Well, it's 30 pages long. Basically, it says if you guys split up, she gets everything. Her money, your business, sole custody of any children you may have. And that's just the highlights. What would you like me to do? I drove over, looked at it, made a copy, and sent it back. I had written in thick black marker, "No way in hell." I showed it to Eve, and she couldn't even speak for a few minutes. When she calmed down, she asked me if I seriously thought she had approved it. I laughed. Not a chance. Eve said she would have another lawyer draw one up. Tensions, already high between her father and me, were threatening to boil over. I decided to put the whole thing to rest when I wrote my own prenuptial agreement. It was less than 1 page. I had my lawyer drafted in legal terms and presented it during lunch with her parents. Eve had already seen it. The gist went like this. If the marriage should fail for non-sexual reasons, each party will leave with what they brought into it, dividing anything accumulated together 50-50. If children are involved, mediation will be required to ensure that custody arrangements are equitable. All parties must agree to the mediator's decision without resorting to further legal action. If the separation is due to unfaithfulness, the offending party will immediately forfeit all claims to any children, property, or assets brought into the marriage unless they opt for an alternative. The infidelity must be documented in a manner that is beyond dispute. If the offending party acknowledges the infidelity and publicly apologizes in a manner determined by the wronged party, the previous agreement will remain in effect. Greta thought it was charming, but Stan went into a rage. However, it was too late. The agreement had already been signed and recorded. Without a doubt, it was the most extravagant wedding the town had ever seen. We had to hold it at the Citizen Center because no church was large enough. With 500 guests, around 40 were my family, and Eve was responsible for about 80. The remaining guests were mostly political acquaintances of her father. Greta later told me it cost about $200,000. Celeste was a bridesmaid. Aine was the flower girl, and Vivian helped officiate the ceremony. We spent 3 weeks in Cancun, and when we returned, we were exhausted. I thought she might be pushing me to my limits. We would do activities like scuba diving or horseback riding, and she would frequently check her ring. Within 30 minutes of getting back to our suite, in a secluded cove or any private room we could find, we were intimately together. When discussing the prenuptial agreement, we had a serious conversation about her finances. I surprised her by acknowledging that I would never match her financial status. While I was open to using her money occasionally for vacations, education, and lifestyle improvements, I didn't want to rely on it. What I refused to do was relinquish my business. I was proud of having established and run a successful business at my age. I sold my small 2-bedroom house and rented it to a cousin. Her parents' wedding gift was money for a new house, which her father had already selected. It was 3 doors down from their house, and even bigger than his 8-bedroom home with a media room. Eve liked it but wasn't enamored with it. The fact that her father had chosen it was not lost on her. We found a charming plot of land about 20 minutes away, and I let Eve choose the house. The land sloped slightly, and she worked closely with the builders to design a home with bedrooms upstairs and a full basement, mainly constructed of brick and stone with 2 fireplaces. She meticulously reviewed every detail with me to ensure I agreed, particularly focusing on the basement as a playroom and entertainment center for our future children. She had already planned birthday and sleepover parties. This led to a discussion about how many children we wanted. As many as we can love, I answered. Judging by her smile, I must have answered correctly. I don't think I can physically have that many. How about starting with 3 and seeing how it goes? She wanted to get pregnant immediately, but I convinced her to wait and enjoy our time together first. Honey, we both know that once we have kids, the focus will shift entirely to them. Our desires will always come last, and that's how it should be. But for now, I want to be a bit selfish and keep you to myself. I must have said the right thing, judging by the affection I received that night. Eve usually took the lead during our intimate moments. Although I wasn't inexperienced, she was far more seasoned. We had a thorough conversation about it just after our engagement. To her credit, she brought it up first. I need you to know everything about me. You saw me at my worst the first day we met. I was a rebellious, spoiled wild child. My mother was great but not very forceful. And you know my father. I've done many things I'm now ashamed of. I don't want to discuss them much, but I will if necessary. Suffice it to say, I wasn't a very nice person. I had an STD, and unfortunately, it wasn't the first time. I'm not sure how I avoided more severe illnesses like AIDS or hepatitis. I avoided drugs but relied on alcohol. Falling off the balcony was a turning point for me. It mobilized in that hospital bed. I had plenty of time to think. Even if you hadn't rescued me, I believe I would have changed eventually. Meeting you and your family opened my eyes to how the real world works, not my fantasy party lifestyle. I wanted that lifestyle, but then I realized I wanted you. Of all my party friends, I only keep in touch with about 5, all former college friends. I don't care about the rest. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I've had relations with many people. You are the only one I've loved. I promise I'll never revert to my old ways. What I have with you is too precious to risk. There were many tears during our heartfelt speech, and I could tell it took a lot of courage for her to share it. I hugged her tightly and said, "Honey, the past is the past, and we can't change it. I didn't know you then. I can only base my feelings on who you've been since we've been together. I wake up every morning with you beside me, and appreciate how fortunate I am. So no, I don't need to hear details. It wouldn't change how I feel about you. Who you are now is more than enough for me." And that was true for the past 3 years. Her father was driven by a strong ambition. After serving 2 terms as Speaker of the House, he had set his sights on becoming governor. He and his team had spent 3 years laying the groundwork. The week before his announcement, he invited even me over for dinner and shared his plans, emphasizing that he needed the support of his family. He looked directly at me. Although I didn't personally like him, he was an effective politician and had crafted several pieces of legislation that I supported, including one that benefited small businesses. "If you're referring to me, Stanley, I have no issue supporting you," I said. He beamed and replied, "Good, good. I need you to know that you too will need to accompany me from time to time. The committee might even ask you to do a commercial or two. Do you think you can handle that?" I felt a bit trapped, but I shrugged. I disliked the man and thought he was quite unpleasant, but I loved his daughter. "Sure, as long as it's not too time-consuming," I said. He quickly reassured me 1 or 2 days at most, I promise. He seemed nervous as we drove home, clutching my hand like a lifeline. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. "Thank you, honey, for helping my dad, but promise me you won't let Paul influence you." "I don't think I could handle it," she said. I didn't understand her intensity, but tried to comfort her. "No worries, babe. My volunteer work has shown me that I could never be a politician. You have to sacrifice so much of yourself, and there's nothing left at the end of the day. It's not a lifestyle I could enjoy." My involvement in various committees started by accident. Eve participated in several to keep herself occupied, but I usually stayed away from that aspect of her life. I even resented it at times when it took time away from us, but they were all worthy causes she believed in. So I kept my complaints to myself. This particular cuss sought me out, and I couldn't ignore it. My first cousin had a daughter who contracted scarlet fever as a child. Her temperature rose to 109, leading to a fever-induced heat stroke that left her mentally challenged. She could perform basic tasks, but would never be able to live independently. Her parents were devoted to her. The state had a program that had been running for years, providing a social center and workplace for adults with disabilities. Anyone over school age who could function in a social setting could participate. Vans were provided for transportation, and local companies subcontracted simple tasks like packing boxes and folding t-shirts. One manufacturer had them punch holes in paper tubes. Each participant received a check at the end of the month, usually around $100, which gave them a sense of pride and a contribution to society. The federal grant was ending, and the state refused to continue the program, going back on the promise made by the previous administration. We had 1 month to secure enough funds to keep the program running until new funding could be arranged. The impact on families would be devastating. Parents would have to quit their jobs to provide care, incomes would drop, and homes could be lost. I was invited to the organizational meeting because of my political connections through my father-in-law. They were mistaken if they thought I was naturally inclined toward politics. I had always been uninterested. It became clear that there were no strong leaders among the group, and most were in a mild panic. Finally, my cousin asked me to say a few words. I took the podium and said, "First, we need to stay calm. Yes, it's a serious problem, but panicking won't help us. We need to find enough operational funds to last another month. This will give us time to appeal to those in power and the public. We need a spokesperson, a planning committee, and clear direction. Does anyone have ideas for fundraising?" Various fundraising methods were discussed and tentative plans were made. The debate heated up over who should lead the group. We represented 2 small counties connected by districts, and both counties felt one of their own should be in charge. Why not have co-chairs, one from each county? I suggested that way each can handle their own tasks and meet weekly with the committee to review progress and discuss suggestions. This idea was quickly accepted. The committee was formed with 3 people from each county. A local businessman was proposed, lobbied for, and accepted from the other county. Then I was unexpectedly appointed as the other co-chair by unanimous decision. There was a lot of applause, and I hesitated for a moment before accepting. The other chair made promises without considering how to achieve them. I took a completely different approach. This is going to be challenging. The politicians have already made up their minds, and persuading them will be difficult. Our task is going to be demanding. One thing I do know is that each of us has some talent that will be useful, and we know others who can contribute similarly. We need to identify and leverage these talents. We need researchers to look for any loopholes in previous grants or potential new ones. We also need to engage with local politicians for temporary funding. Additionally, we must prepare to approach state and federal officials. If we can't secure their commitment, we need to find out why and make that information public. One thing politicians dislike more than anything is negative publicity. Our first appeal was to our county commissioners. We calculated the cost to run the program for a month and requested a one-time grant of $3,500. I had spoken to a local radio personality who agreed to help with a fundraiser and connected me with their news department. We ensured we were on the agenda and showed up with a strong presence, parents, siblings, friends, and of course, all the adults with disabilities. The meeting room was overflowing. I had met with the county commissioners 2 days earlier to provide information and figures that justified keeping the program running. They assured me we would likely receive the funds when needed. I made the request clearly, citing facts and figures that showed discontinuing the program would actually cost the government 5 times as much in other expenses. What surprised me was the amount of media attention it attracted. My radio contacts were there, but so were journalists from 2 local papers and a TV news crew tipped off by my DJ friend. We made the 11 o'clock news, and the morning programs followed up. The response was substantial, guaranteeing follow-up interviews and additional news coverage. We were surprised when the senior commissioner responded to our request. "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. All residents of this county deserve respect, and this is a worthy program that should never have faced termination. Our state government did a poor job by not giving parents and caregivers adequate notice or time to prepare. That said, we intend to assist as much as possible. Unfortunately, we can't fulfill your request for $3,500. However, we believe $5,000 is a more appropriate amount. Use the funds wisely, and hopefully, our neighboring county will also be generous." The room erupted in applause as I stood there under the TV lights. We made sure to thank each commissioner personally at the end of the meeting. One of the adults with disabilities, a middle-aged woman, was moved to tears, hugging everyone and expressing her gratitude. The media responded enthusiastically. The project gained momentum as people we didn't know started offering financial support and volunteering their time. I gave an exclusive interview with the radio station to express our thanks, discuss our progress, and talk about the support we were receiving. It turned into a 3-day-a-week update. My first experience with politics was straightforward compared to what followed. When we approached the other county commission, it was a different story. The head Republican and the head Democrat, besides their political differences, personally disliked each other. The Republican, a large, Florida-faced man, slammed his hand on the table during our meetings, saying, "No, we don't have the money for this. The federal and state governments messed this up. Let them fix it." The Democrat, a small man with a dark complexion and thick black hair, countered, "Cut it out, Jim. It doesn't matter who's responsible at this point. The media is all over this. The people we're meeting with on Thursday are all local. Besides doing the right thing, saying no would be political suicide. We might have to forego a project or two, but this is more important. I'll make sure the public knows how we voted and who voted against it. Do you want to risk your political career?" They argued for a while, but in the end, it was clear the vote would be unanimous. The Democrat insisted that the junior Democratic commissioner, who was facing an election challenge, should present the funds on the night of the meeting. The room was again packed, but this time with 3 TV crews, 6 newspapers, and 4 radio stations. The crowd was aware of the commissioners' relationships and hoped for fireworks, but it was the opposite. There was a sense of calm. They saved us for last. My counterpart couldn't attend, so I gave the speech. It was agreed that when it was time to award the money, the Republican would introduce the junior Democratic commissioner to show unity. However, that was not what happened. The senior Republicans addressed the room. saying, "This is a very good cause, a valuable program that provides significant benefits to the community. We acknowledge our neighboring county's generous support, and we believe we should also contribute more than originally requested." After a brief discussion, we decided to increase your grant from $7,500 to $10,000, primarily due to the generosity of our Democratic colleagues. I'm sure they will be happy to answer any questions you may have. As Republicans and community members, we are pleased to follow their lead. He struck the gavel and declared the meeting adjourned. He smiled as he left, observing his competitors address the press. One afternoon, I came home from work to find 4 individuals waiting in my living room. Eve greeted me with a kiss and introduced them as new volunteers. "Listen to them, honey. They could be a great help. They're all political science majors working on the master's degrees." The leader, Emerson, began their pitch. "I'm going to be honest with you. We're using this as part of our academic work, a kind of David versus Goliath battle, a grassroots organization against the political establishment in the digital age. We have some strategies we believe could benefit you if you're willing to work with us. Where's your headquarters?" That asked, shocked. Eve, who had been listening quietly, laughed and pointed at our kitchen table. "That's it," that asked. "No office. How do you manage to get anything done? Do you have a list of your members and their roles?" He turned to one of his colleagues, Billy. "Get on that. We're going to need an office and a conference room, phones, computers, anything else you think we might need." He pointed at the other 2, Jerry and Zay. "Jerry, research, grant history, and see if there are any other opportunities available. I've heard they have some local contacts. Get in touch and find out what they've got." Zay, review their history and identify which state and federal politicians are supportive, opposed, or undecided. Find out particularly who is up for re-election. "What's your plan?" he asked me. He grinned. "I'll stay closely connected with you. If your group agrees, I'll be your new campaign manager. It's not a traditional campaign since you're not running for office, but you are trying to influence public opinion, and I'm an excellent speechwriter. Are we in?" I shook hands with each of them, and my core team was formed. They were all focused on their individual studies, so their time was flexible. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, and I gained 4 lifelong friends. Within 48 hours, we had a committee headquarters set up in the offices of a defunct textile mill. The owner provided the space for free, but we had to cover the utility costs. I was initially concerned, but that convinced me was essential. Soon, our office resembled a busy workspace with people handling phones and computers from early morning until late at night. That asked if we were coordinating with other committees. "What other committees?" I asked, surprised. He was taken aback. "Surely others have organized. After all, this is a statewide issue. We need to coordinate our efforts to present a united front. The more people involved, the more potential voters we reach, which gives us more leverage with politicians. Those state officials won't be as easy or eager to assist as the locals. But never mind, we'll look into it." Within a week, his tech expert compiled a list of individuals affected by the grant's loss. We obtained a bulk mailing permit and began sending out mass mailings to all registered voters alongside regular updates and appeals via the internet, urging them to contact their state and federal representatives and support the program's continuation. We never solicited donations directly, though there was some debate about it. I didn't want to feel like a typical politician. Instead, we posted our financial status on a blog updated weekly so interested parties could see our progress. Unsolicited donations started coming in, some quite substantial. Several members of our group, who were lawyers, drafted documents designating us as a non-profit watchdog organization with a 4-person committee to oversee the finances. Requests for assistance from across the state began arriving. That, and I traveled extensively, offering advice and support. People started attending our public meetings and conferences to observe our work. While 90% of the state's counties had their own groups, we operated as a state alliance. We divided the state into 4 sections, each electing a representative to coordinate statewide activities. I was elected president. Only one person opposed me, my counterpart from our group, who received 3% of the vote. This created a rift that continued to widen. We partially appeased him by giving him a leadership role for our section of the state while I remained in charge. This arrangement worked well as it prevented the committee from being deadlocked if votes were tied. I cast the deciding vote. Otherwise, I didn't have to vote. Things became a bit tense at home when we discovered that Stanley was one of the main critics of renewing the grant. He tried to persuade me to tone down our efforts when we published a list of all the state and federal politicians who supported and opposed renewing the grant. I was even asked about it during one of my interviews. How do you feel about your father-in-law posing this? I had worked with THAAD, anticipating the question. I have great respect for my father-in-law. The strength of our government is that we can agree or disagree with our bitterness. He has accomplished many good things for the state throughout his career. In this instance, I believe you might not have all the information needed to fully understand the situation, but he's acting according to his principles, and I respect him for that. Great job of navigating a delicate situation, right? In the end, we didn't secure the grant but managed to obtain 2 new federal grants and 1 state grant, which more than doubled the previous funding for the programs. Stanley graciously accepted the outcome in public, even endorsing the approval of the state grant. He commented, "I'm pleased and proud of his role. He's not interested in politics, but he did an outstanding job for the state, and we all appreciate his efforts." Privately, he held a grudge. This experience led to me being involved in various committees at both the state and local levels. Both major parties approached me, urging me to run for county commissioner as a stepping stone for greater things. Both were surprised to learn that I was a registered independent, but I said I would assist in causes I believed in, though not more than one at a time. I nearly burned out from traveling the state for the first cause and resented how it took time away from Eve. Eve and I had become quite close. She had discovered early on that she couldn't have children and had adopted me in particular. She was the one who started recommending me for committees, saying you'll do a great job and follow your conscience, which is rare these days. That's why you'll never be a typical politician, and I love you for it. Stanley resented this and tried to get me to influence her, which annoyed him when I laughed and refused. Every year, the Capitol held a large Christmas parade, and this year Eve was the Grand Marshal. I brought Amy, now 9, to watch the parade. We stayed at Eve's house, and Amy, being her charming self, quickly won Eve over. It was no surprise when Amy ended up in the convertible with her, waving to the crowd from a high perch. Fred, Celeste, and the rest of my family teased her later, but they were proud. The announcers tentatively identified her as a granddaughter, and no one corrected them. A picture on the front page of our local paper labeled her as a local. Her classmates found it odd, especially when Eve made an unexpected appearance at her school for career day, deliberately unannounced to avoid disrupting the school. The election was heating up with 10 months still to go. Preliminary polls showed Stanley slightly ahead, but close enough to cause concern. He had a good flow of contributions and was inundating the media with print ads and commercials. My business had grown significantly. I suspected it might be due to my political connections, but I couldn't control who I married into. If any of my clients hinted at larger contracts in exchange for my supposed influence, I tried to distance myself. I did excellent work at a fair price, so once they realized the situation, they stopped. I now had 4 crews working in various locations, so I rarely laid cable anymore unless it was an emergency. I managed and supervised the work mostly. Eve was proud of my success and encouraged me to start a family. One day, I surprised her by calling her into the bathroom and flushing her birth control pills down the toilet. She cried for 2 hours, then began researching popular baby names online. The evening we spent together was particularly affectionate. 3 months later, Eve greeted me at the door, with tears streaming down her face. I was concerned someone might be hurt. I held her and tried to understand what was wrong. Eventually, she held up a positive pregnancy test. "We're going to have a baby," I exclaimed, dropping to my knees and pulling her down with me. We were both in tears. It took us 10 minutes to compose ourselves and go inside. She had her mother accompany her the next day to the doctor, who confirmed the pregnancy. She and Greta immediately went to Celeste's shop to share the news, which brought the work there to a standstill. Soon, the whole family knew, and we celebrated with a cookout in the meadow. Amy was especially thrilled. At just over 10 years old, she told us plainly that if we ever used anyone else to babysit her when she got older, she would never speak to us again. Eve told her she was hired, even drafting a little contract and signing it. Amy framed it and hung it on her bedroom wall. I did a commercial for Stanley that turned out to be one of the most effective for him. To date, it was me in work clothes operating my equipment. I cut off the camera and looked into it with a dozen political posters of Stanley behind me. "Stanley Wallace," I said seriously. "Yes, I'm voting for him. His programs for small business owners like me put him well ahead of his competition. He understands that we're the backbone of this country. If we go, so goes the state." I added a personal note, which I thought they might edit out, but they liked it so much they kept it in. Besides, he's my father-in-law. My wife would be very upset if I didn't vote for him. He won his primary easily, but his opponent did even better, garnering almost 150,000 more votes than Stanley. His team was concerned that if his opponent could generate that kind of support in the primary, he might win come November. Stanley increased his advertising, ensuring one of his commercials aired at least once an hour on all local channels. His opponent was single, having divorced years ago, and never remarrying. His team highlighted this contrast, portraying Stanley as a dedicated family man. Greta, Eve, and I were included in countless appearances to reinforce this image. It got tiresome quickly. I reduced my involvement despite Stanley's displeasure. I wasn't running for office and had a business to manage. Eve came home with me for a few days, but then her dad called, and she rejoined him on the campaign trail against my wishes. She called every night initially, but then less frequently. He was focusing on the western part of the state, his weakest area. I saw them on television, and both Eve and Greta were looking increasingly exhausted, and their smiles seemed forced. I insisted it was time for a break. It was 6 weeks before the election, and his opponent was ahead by 4 points. Stanley was working intensely, barely sleeping, and expecting the same from everyone around him. Eve was 6 months pregnant, and the demanding pace was taking a toll on her. I went to the town where he was speaking, unannounced, and tried to take Eve home. "Enough is enough," I said. "You look worn out, and I'm worried about the baby. Your dad either wins, or he doesn't. At this point, it doesn't matter. Let's go home. I'll build a fire, we'll relax, and I'll take care of you." Eve clung to me as if I were a lifeline, but she refused. "I can't, honey. I promised Dad I'd stay until the election. It's only a few more weeks. I'll be home soon, and we'll be fine." Her eyes were filled with worry, and it troubled me greatly. "Listen to me carefully, Eve. I don't like how you're looking or acting. It seems like you're hiding something. Look me in the eye and tell me what's going on." She held me tightly but wouldn't meet my gaze. Greta came in looking concerned. I asked her to speak with her daughter, worried for the baby's well-being. Greta reassured me, "Please, Tommy, it's just a few more weeks. I'll make sure she gets enough rest and takes her vitamins. It will be over soon." I was firm. If he wins, he'll be gearing up for re-election in 2 years. If he loses, he'll start planning his comeback. Either way, we lose. We're going home now. "Eve, let's get you packed." She looked at her mother in panic. They were about to respond when Stanley entered with his entourage, including his security detail. "Tommy, what's this about taking Eve home? It isn't possible right now. Demographics show many women relate to her, especially with her being pregnant. Be reasonable. Stay with us and your team can manage themselves for a few weeks." I was stunned by his audacity. "No, Stanley. Did I mention he hates being called that? But no, there's not an office in the world worth the health of my wife and child. We're leaving soon. End of discussion. Instead of responding, Stanley signaled for everyone to leave, except his security team for large ex-military men. As they departed, I heard Eve whisper, "Please, Daddy, don't," as the door closed. Stanley's expression when he turned was unpleasant. "Listen," he said, "I'm not about to let some redneck ruin this campaign, even if my daughter was foolish enough to marry him. I need to win. I've made promises to many people that I need to fulfill. Think about it. There could be a significant position for you with a great salary and perks." I was incredulous. "Listen closely, Stanley. I don't care if you win this election or not. It's not worth my wife and child's well-being. We're going home, and I don't want to hear any more about it. Don't push me on this. I'd hate to go to the press and tell them that the great Stanley Wallace wants to be governor so badly he's willing to risk the health of his only child and first granddaughter. That would not go over well with Marge in Norville." Then it became surreal. Greta and Eve were both crying, begging him to leave it alone. But the two smallest security guards took their arms firmly and led them out. Eve had the look of a trapped animal. "Please, honey, please remember I love you," she kept begging as they shut the door. I hadn't been idle while this was going on. I immediately went after her, but the two biggest security guards restrained me. I think I surprised one when I tried to headbutt him. He staggered back, but the other one responded by hitting me in the stomach. I wasn't a fighter, wasn't trained in martial arts, but I was a husband, and I was enraged. Even out of breath on the ground, I tried to fight back. The guy I headbutt kicked me hard, which knocked me out. I came to, strapped into a chair. Stanley pulled another chair in front of me, lifted my head and slapped me hard. "Good, you're awake. You don't know how long I've wanted to do that. I despise you." I had big plans for Eve, getting her married to just the right man to make us all happy. Then here comes Joe Redneck and screws it all up. But you have a chance to save everything. Being a redneck brings in a certain vote. He slapped me again, grinning. Damn, I could do that all day and enjoy it. All right, now that I've got your attention, here's how it's going to be. Tomorrow and for the rest of the campaign, you're going to be on every podium with me, smiling and waving to the crowd. Understand? If you do, then when it's over, you can go back to your petty little life. Though not with Eve, of course. But if you're good, I'll allow occasional visits with your child. He was grinning like mad, enjoying this immensely. My rage was beyond description. Screw you, Stan. When this gets out, you're done. Kidnapping, assault, kiss the governorship goodbye. He actually laughed. You won't tell. I have a little leverage, insurance if you will. Watch this, he said, holding up his phone and showing a video clip that shattered my world. It showed Eve in a room somewhere, with Stanley's voice in the background. She was visibly distressed. The camera then showed a man in his late 50s, and the situation was clearly inappropriate. Stanley cut off the video. You don't need to see the rest. You know what happens. Here's how it's going to work. Nobody needs to see this. Nobody needs to know just what your wife is involved in. Think about the baby. It may actually be yours. If you want me to keep this buried, you'll be up on that podium with me tomorrow, smiling and waving. When I win, you can go back home. Eve might actually want to return with you. I don't care. I'll be done with her at least until the next election. Understand? Just so you know, if you go against this, I'll tip off the authorities about the compromising material on your computer, put there by my people, and make sure you never see your child. My eyes widened, my face flushed, and my heart raced. I had never known such rage and heartbreak. Then a cold came over me. I wasn't going to kill him, I was going to destroy him. He would never hold public office again, and maybe he'd even end up in jail. One thing was for sure, I was done with the whole family. Nothing mattered anymore except revenge. Stanley's eyes narrowed. You're thinking about doing something stupid. I can see it in your eyes. Think about it. I'd hate for Eve to end up in an accident, maybe even lose the baby. God, how I wanted to kill him then. I took great pleasure in imagining beating him to death, slowly, savoring every blow. If you do end up doing something foolish, I had a lot of video footage you wouldn't want your family to see. It will somehow find its way onto the internet. I'll be devastated, of course. But you let her into such a dreadful lifestyle, and promise to stand by her while she's rehabilitated. Face it, your only option is to comply. It will be over soon, and I'll find you a cushy job far away from me and out of the public eye. Then he made his mistake. Oh, one more thing, he said, slamming a fist into my ribs. We all heard a crack and a pain like I'd never known washed over me. Damn, that felt good. I slumped, trying to breathe. They left me strapped to the chair for what seemed like hours, though it was probably only 10 minutes. One of the security guards finally noticed my labored breathing and the blood on my lips. The rib had punctured along, and I was literally drowning in my own blood. It still took them 20 minutes to decide to call the EMTs. They took their time bruising me further before dropping me at the bottom of the hotel stairs. I was put into intensive care after the operation. When I finally woke up, the doctor and nurses were very reserved around me. The doctor tried to explain my injuries. When you fell down the stairs, Doc, if you're any kind of doctor at all, you can see I was beaten. I expect you to testify in the trial. The doctor wouldn't look me in the eye. Your fall down the stairs caused significant damage. We've placed you in a light cast, and the splint on your broken finger should allow it to heal properly. Just follow the nurse's instructions, and you'll be fine in a month. We're going to keep you here for a few days to ensure the healing process. Is there anything we can get you? Just buzz if you need anything. I was starting to get really frustrated. I need my cell phone back. I need to make a few calls. And where are my clothes? The nurse adjusted my fore. Now, remember to stay calm. I was doing my best to try to scream for help when I passed out. I was kept sedated for 6 days. I remember people coming in and out, barely being awake long enough to be fed by a nurse. On the 7th day, I opened my eyes clearly for the first time. There was a young nurse watching me. She looked familiar somehow. You don't remember me, do you? She asked. I looked at her as she adjusted my fore, feeling anxious that she might be preparing to put me back to sleep. She leaned down close to my ear and whispered, "It's pure saline. It should flush the drugs out of your system in a couple of days. I've met you before. You helped my sister keep her job. If she hadn't kept it, my mom would have had to quit her job, and we would have lost our house. Now, is there anything I can do for you that won't be traced back to me? They have guards posted outside, and we're checked before and after we enter the room. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like it isn't strictly legal." I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Suddenly, I knew what to do. I repeated the same number to her over and over until I felt she had committed it to memory. "Call this woman. Don't do it from your phone. Borrow one. Tell her where I am, what's happening, and tell her to come get me as fast as she can. Tell her to bring Jerry. She'll know what I mean. Don't give her your name, and I'll keep you out of it. But hurry. Do it as soon as you can." 18 hours later, I heard a commotion outside my room. A couple of shouts, a few grunts, and the door was swept open. A man I had worked with on a committee last year walked through the door, followed by Vivian. The doctor was with me, desperately adjusting the Ford drip. I had acted confused and unresponsive, maintaining the pretense. I looked up and grinned. "Give it up, document. I'm wide awake." "Hello, Vivian. You have no idea how happy I am to see you. I need a blood test right away. I have no idea what they've been putting into my system. Oh, and have Jerry arrest everyone you see, would you? You'll do that, won't you?" Jerry, head of the State Bureau of Investigation, said he'd like to do just that. But for now, he was holding everyone for questioning while he sorted it out. I found out I was in a private clinic, mostly for people who wanted to lose weight. They seized everything. Jerry explained that they were looking into charges of kidnapping, assault, reckless endangerment of life due to the drug cocktail I had been on, and as many smaller charges as he could think of. The doctor demanded a lawyer. His face paled, and he lost most of his bravado when he was told that due to the political nature of the case, it was being handled under Homeland Security guidelines, meaning no contact with the outside world. He was also told that the first to make a deal would be the one to benefit most in the plea negotiations. One of the nurses, realizing the gravity of the situation, cut a deal and cooperated fully. Jerry put them all into custody with no contact with the outside world while he sorted out the charges. Vivian was enraged. I always knew he was dishonest. I'm going to enjoy watching his world collapse. We need to get you safe. I felt a surge of emotional pain as I realized Eve, the love of my life, was no longer a part of my future. The physical pain and uncertainty of my situation had pushed the emotional pain aside, but now it surged forward. For 30 minutes, Vivian held and rocked me while I screamed in pain and cried. She sent everyone but Jerry out of the room while I recounted what I had learned from the video I had seen. When I was spent, Vivian held my head between her hands, looking into my eyes. I've known Eve for a long time, Tommy. She loves you. No one is that good an actress. Something is terribly wrong. Have you heard her explanation? As she said, she doesn't love you. When I told her I hadn't had a chance to talk to Eve and didn't know what I would say if I did, she begged me to reserve judgment until we talked. I don't know if I can. Even if we do talk, I can't get that video out of my head. What could she possibly say to justify that? I don't know, honey. We need to see her, and you need a promise to listen. Will you? After a few minutes of soul-searching, I agreed I would, if nothing else, to confirm that the marriage was really over. We needed to act quickly. Stan didn't know I was free, and I was sure he had someone reporting on me regularly. Jerry took my complaint to establish a legal reason to investigate him. At the very least, he could be charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted extortion. When I mentioned the threat regarding inappropriate content on my computer, he immediately sent someone to collect it. Because of the kidnapping, the FBI was called in. They agreed to let the State Bureau of Investigation take the lead, then add federal charges as needed. While Stan was in custody, being sedated and confined to bed actually helped my rib heal, allowing me to move relatively well as long as I avoided sudden movements or bumps. We needed to seize his cell phone and as many of his campaign computers as we could. Can you tell me how many people were aware of what's going on? I asked. I had no idea about his security detail for sure. Beyond that, I have no idea. Talk to his wife and daughter, Jerry said. Jerry was all business. Stan had a bad reputation with law enforcement, and they brainstormed strategies. Vivian came up with a plan. Stan kept his cell phone in a briefcase carried by one of his security detail, while he made speeches to avoid distractions. He had a rally with state workers to attend the next day. I would appear to intimidate him, and they would serve Stan and his crew by confiscating all cell phones. They wouldn't arrest him, just announce he was under investigation, hoping he would panic and make a mistake. The next day, I was driven to the rally and rolled in a wheelchair. I was pretty sore, but I brought a cane because I wanted to be on my feet when I confronted him. They kept me in seclusion until the speech was over and the question and answer session began. There was nothing spontaneous about it. All the questions were pre-approved and Stan had prepared answers. At the very end, as the press was packing up, I stood and the SBI agents cleared a path. I hobbled to the edge of the platform. I've got a question for you. I called out even though it made my rib feel terrible. Where's my wife? Is she out there serving political allies? Who is she involved with for you today? Stan actually went pale and then tried to leave the platform. He was met by SBI agents with warrants. The press was in a frenzy, shouting questions and demanding answers. I think Stanley knew right then that his political career was over, but was too delusional and obsessive to accept it. I was mostly unnoticed until the man with the briefcase made a desperate run for freedom, jumping into the crowd. Bad luck for him. He ran right at me. I held the cane like a bat, waiting. He saw me at the last moment and tried to veer off, but it was the same person who had attacked me before. I struck him across the forearm, and everyone nearby heard the bone snap as he dropped the briefcase. Despite his obviously broken arm, he tried to pick it up. I grabbed him around the neck, which wasn't the best idea as it propelled him right into me, causing us both to fall. He landed on top of me, and I experienced the pain of my broken rib all over again. Pain overwhelmed me, and I could only lie there. The agents quickly reached us, seized him in the briefcase, and helped me back into the wheelchair. There were always ambulances at these large rallies, so they arrived quickly. A reporter shoved the microphone in my face and asked what happened. "Stanley Wallace happened," I gasped. "He did this to me." The police pulled the reporter out of the way, making room for the ambulance. Someone in the crowd recognized me, and as the painkillers began to take effect, I was asked, "Mr. Yeah, do you still support Stanley Wallace?" "Not just no, but hell no," I replied. The man as a snake will do anything to get elected. He'd even make outrageous promises to secure votes if he thought it would work. That might have been a bit dramatic, but I was aiming for impact. Jerry gave a statement to the press from the rally stage. At this time, Speaker Wallace is being investigated for possible campaign violations, aggravated assault, threats, and kidnapping. The FBI has graciously allowed us to leave the investigation, and we will work closely together, releasing new information as it becomes available. That is all I can say at this time. Thank you. The press had a field day. There were videos and photos of Stan being led away in my confrontation with his security guard, went viral on YouTube, hitting 2 million views in 5 days. The networks, especially Fox, kept it in the public around the clock. Stanley went into seclusion, claiming the charges were false, fabricated by his political enemies in a bitter ex-son-in-law because his daughter was divorcing him for abuse and mental cruelty. Despite running ads, the stations pulled them within 4 days, and his chances of winning plummeted. Analysts were predicting a significant win for his opponent. I was in protective custody. My brother Fred was a county deputy, and the FBI asked the sheriff to loan him up for security purposes because he would be familiar with who was supposed to be around. My whole family, Celeste, the boys, and Amy moved into my house. Vivian was there as often as she could. She and Amy took turns looking after me. One day, Amy caught me holding our wedding picture and crying. She spoke to me, but I didn't acknowledge her. Our daughter was 11 now, and starting to look more like Celeste every day. I felt her hands on my cheeks, gently turning me around. I had long since shaved off my beard, but the gesture was familiar. I know Aniv didn't do those things, and deep down, you know it too. She'll come home. You'll see. Nothing could keep her from you. Believe Uncle Tommy, please believe, she said. They found the inappropriate content on my computer. The FBI assigned Jerry a couple of experts who traced the content through 3 continents and 11 countries before the trail ended in the state capital. The computers and cell phones yielded a lot of interesting information. It appeared Stan was blackmailing some supporters with hidden video of them in compromising situations over several years. Aside from the clip he had shown me, there were no more videos of Eve, but there were clips of Greta with 6 different men, each time appearing drugged or frightened. It was too late for his party to salvage the election, so they denounced him and withdrew support. A week before the election, he was arrested shortly after trying to leave the country. His campaign accountant, realizing he was facing a lengthy prison sentence, cut a deal and revealed everything. The same was true for 2 of his security detail and the campaign manager. So many wanted to make deals that Jerry stopped offering them. An assistant had a crucial piece of information. She knew where even Greta were. It had been over 2 weeks since I had been attacked. Jerry had everyone available searching for them, but there was no trace. They were in a private rehab facility 2 states away, Vivian told me. Despite her pleas not to, I went with them when they went to pick them up for questioning. Since they were out of state, the FBI took the lead. They arrived with a warrant and 4 teams, plus Jerry and part of his team. He was there as a guest, and to take them into custody for questioning to determine if extradition was necessary. They showed up unexpectedly. The director met them and invited them into his office. He said he had nothing to hide, and that they were free to look anywhere they wanted. But for liability purposes, he wanted the company attorney present to review the warrants and observe. The agent in charge was polite, but recognized stall tactics. He turned to his team and said, "Start now. Detain anyone who tries to obstruct you. I'll stay here with the director and his lawyer." I was outside waiting with Vivian, who insisted on coming. When the press began speculating about my involvement, Vivian held a press conference. In my opinion, as well as that of all who have come to know him, Tony is a decent and moral person. I consider him and his wife as surrogate children. My husband and I have enjoyed their friendship for years. I stand behind the belief that he will be vindicated and cleared of any wrongdoing in this affair. Thank you. I had served with Vivian on 2 committees and often escorted her to various functions. If her husband, a lawyer with a successful private practice, was unavailable, he introduced me to golf and laughed when I became booked. He was the legal counsel for me in this situation. When a tabloid speculated that we were involved in some sort of high-profile group, he buried the paper under numerous lawsuits, forcing a retraction after a substantial donation to his nonprofit group. This group, composed of lawyers from various branches, provided pro bono legal advice on everything from wills to divorces and educated the public about the law. They even helped clean parks and worked in soup kitchens. It had become so popular that there was a branch in every large town in the state. I was on the founding committee, included from my lay perspective, and because John liked me, every out-of-town meeting ended with a round of golf. Vivian spotted 2 ambulances with the clinic logo exiting quietly from a service lot. She immediately called Jerry, and the FBI intercepted them before they had traveled a mile. Greta was in one of the ambulances, and the other was arrested immediately. The clinic's records and computers were seized. They had been there since the day after the attack, secluded and sedated the entire time. The director was later charged with reckless medical endangerment of a pregnant woman and her unborn child, a felony in that state. They were brought out slowly and monitored closely. I went in to see her while she was still unconscious. I leaned on my cane, watching her as she slept. She was pale and thin, her hair appeared lifeless. I was reminded of her hair flying and her eyes sparkling as she danced around the kitchen singing to the baby. I looked at her pregnant stomach, now 7 months along, and wondered if the child would be all right, and if it was mine. I didn't speak or try to touch her, knowing I would break down completely if I did. As it was, the tears made it hard for me to see. I checked on Greta. I had always liked her, the quiet smile she would get watching us together. The tears she shed when we gave her the t-shirt that said "I'm too hot to be a grandmother," Eve's way of telling her we were finally giving her that grandchild she wanted. Even in her sleep, she looked haunted. I wondered what kind of secret life she must have led all these years. The story grew more extensive. Besides Stanley, 3 of his security detail, his accountant, his campaign manager, both doctors and various nurses, the head of the party, 2 state representatives, 1 federal congressman, 3 judges, 5 lawyers, 10 escort professionals, and 13 businessmen were implicated. Jerry was like an avenging angel, causing turmoil among those involved. Every time someone was arrested, he implicated someone else. The Wall Street Journal called it the biggest political scandal of the 21st century. Numerous editorials demanded an end to career politicians and the strictest punishment possible for all guilty parties. Greta and Eve were deposed with Vivian present. After it was over, Vivian came out, fussed over Amy for a bit, and took me for a walk. She handed me a transcript and said, "I can't bear to tell you, so you'll just have to read it." Greta had been mistreated and was almost enslaved by Stanley from the time they married. Some of the things he forced her to do made me so sick that I actually threw up. He only allowed her to have Eve because he needed a family image. He controlled them with constant psychological manipulation and careful use of drugs. The first time he exploited Eve, she was just over 16. He sacrificed her virginity to a 64-year-old man for political gain. The statute of limitations had expired, but his reputation was ruined. At 75, he found himself divorced, broke and ostracized. Around that time, she began rebelling and turning to drugs and alcohol. He couldn't make it public and face scrutiny, so he had people clean up her messes and keep it out of the press. She thought she had distanced herself from him when she got to college, but he pulled her back in a 20 through force and blackmail. He routinely filmed her and Greta for leverage against the men he set them up with. His obsession with recording things hastened his downfall. There was evidence of corruption all the way back to the beginning of his career. She had finally broken free when she met me, telling him that if she lost me, she had nothing to lose. She included Greta in the deal, and for almost 4 years, both their lives were as normal as they were supposed to be. She didn't want to campaign for him, but went along to protect her mom. They were fine as long as I was there, but when I went home, he systematically drugged them, reasserting his control. They fought, but in the end, he had control. It all unraveled when I came to take her home. If he had let her go, she would have taken her mother with her, and rumors would have started. There was a recording of him, his campaign manager, and 2 of his security team discussing letting them go, using the first-time pregnancy and a worried mother's reasons, maybe filming them at home cheering him on. The campaign manager stopped that idea, reminding Stan of promises he needed to keep to secure support. At that moment, I think I hated the campaign manager even more than Stanley. "I've recovered enough to start asking for me," I said. I was still deeply hurt and bitterly angry and refused. "Vivian begged me. She needs you. You were her anchor, her comfort, her validation that she was a good person, loved just for being herself with no agenda. Please, Tommy, for me, please." I hugged her. "You've been like a surrogate mother to me. You know my parents died in an accident when I was in my late teens, and my feelings for you made me realize what I missed. Do you know we had decided to name the child Vivian, Greta, for her mother and mine?" Vivian had tears in her eyes. "I can't, Vivian. Not right now. If she needed me so badly, why didn't she stay home? Didn't she realize that anything he had on her would hurt him far worse than her if anything came out? What could have made her do it?" Vivian slapped me. That's what made her do it. She couldn't take the chance that you would leave her if you found out. I know it doesn't really make sense to us, but you have to remember she wasn't thinking clearly. The mental and physical abuse, the drugs, the shame made her desperate to keep it from you. You're a world, Tommy, the only good thing that's happened in her life since she was born. She could see in her eyes that she was losing. At least think about the baby she's carrying. Doesn't it deserve a good life? The pain was clear in my voice. What about me? Do I deserve any of this? I do think about the baby. What if it's not mine? Worse, what if it is mine? You know I'll get custody. I don't think a judge would let her raise a child alone with her history. Vivian grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise. Don't ever say anything like that where she could hear it. That baby and the hope that you may forgive her are all that's keeping her alive. Please, Tommy, I've never asked you for anything again. Please. Celeste came to me later that day. I'm going to see her. I want her to look me in the eye and tell me why she betrayed you. Maybe it'll ease the pain for both of us. Amy is begging to see her, but I won't let her. Not yet. I'll call you later. Celeste talked to her and Greta. She never said much about what they discussed, but she did mention that her psychiatrist wanted to talk to me. In fact, she said the psychiatrist was almost pleading with Celeste. Amy and Vivian teamed up, pressing me for 3 days before I agreed. I think I surprised them all by laying down some ground rules. This is not about me. If I get the slightest sense of an agenda, or if she tries to direct me in a way I don't want to go, the conversation is over. I reserve the right to refuse to answer any questions, but will not extend the same courtesy if she refuses to answer. The conversation is over if she does not comply. Make it clear to her, no messages from Eve. None. It took the doctor 2 days before she agreed to my terms. I think it shocked her when I refused to go to her office and made her come to my house. I ensured we were alone. I didn't offer her refreshments. I just had her sit on the couch. Well, first, Tommy, thank you for seeing me. You have a lovely home. Thank you, and it's Mr. Y. You're not my friend. You're not my doctor. You're a consultant here to provide me with something I may not want, so let's keep it formal. I'll make it easy for you. What do you want? She paused, having to think on the fly to avoid angering me. It took her a few minutes to decide how to proceed. I'll come right to the point. Eve is not doing very well. We've removed the drugs from her system, but she's not improving. She needs you. I've spent a good deal of time with her. You're her anchor, her validation that she was a good person and deserved happiness. By taking that away, you're destroying her. If it weren't for the baby, I'm afraid she'd be in a very dire state. Please, you don't have to talk about the future or commit to anything. Just be there. She needs you, Tom. She waited expectantly. Let me ask you something, doctor. Since we're discussing your patient, am I covered by confidentiality rules? Can you discuss anything I've said or will say today with anyone? She agreed that the conversation was confidential. I could see the shock on her face when I responded. You know what, doctor? I'm tired of being told what to do to ease the pain or what I need to do to help her get better. You know what else? Forget it. I'm sick of people telling me to help her. Did I wreck the marriage? Is there a video of me out there somewhere involved in inappropriate activities to help her father win an election? Did I get her nearly beaten to death, then drugged and hidden away? She's in a protected facility, keeping the real world away from her. I'm left dealing with the media, the rumors, and the judgment when I walk down the street. Walk a mile in my shoes, doctor, and then ask me to be compassionate. This conversation is over. Goodbye, doctor. Have a nice life. I didn't slam the door in her face, but it was a close thing. I felt a little bad about it later. She had been drugged and confined against her will, but vending felt good. Maybe I needed to seek therapy myself. I had not been idle during this time. My lawyer came to me. It's time to protect your assets. Remember that prenuptial agreement we made as a joke. Well, it might have been a joke, but that doesn't make it any less legal. I remembered. I didn't want the money, but it was a way to make her admit she had betrayed me. He froze all our assets, citing the prenup. I reminded him to tell her that all she had to do was admit her infidelity, and she would get everything back, but it had to be done publicly in a manner of my choosing. She refused. Greta was out of the hospital, but was in seclusion at a high-end clinic specializing in trauma and abuse cases. She wasn't restricted to the grounds, although they discouraged leaving the facility. There was a knock at my door, and when I answered, I found her on her knees. Greta, what are you doing? I'm begging, Tommy. You have to go see her. She stopped eating, and they're feeding her through tubes. They're worried about the baby. I'm a broken woman, Tommy. I have nothing, no self-respect, no future, and now I'm about to lose my family. I'll do anything. Do you understand? Anything to save my daughter and grandchild. Please, Tommy, please. I helped her up and brought her inside. You're not alone, Greta. I've always admired you and always thought you'd be a perfect grandmother. Vivian cares for you a lot, whether she says anything or not. I read your statement. None of what happened to you was your fault. It broke my heart. I'll always be here for you, for anything you need. I need you to save my daughter and your wife and child. Please, I'll go with you. The pain was overwhelming, and I crumbled mentally. The health of my child and the woman I loved was at risk. I hurried her into the car. She looked ghostly pale, so thin she seemed skeletal. Her 8-month pregnant belly appeared unusually large compared to the rest of her. She had been lightly sedated, and her arms were restrained to prevent her from pulling out the IVs or feeding tubes. I didn't think my heart could ache more, but I was wrong. On the way over, Greta told me a lot. I know how it looks, Tommy, but she never betrayed you. The film clip you saw was the only time she came close. She was coerced, but in the end, she couldn't go through with it. She was restrained, and when he tried to force himself, she reacted and injured him. Stanley would have punished her severely if I hadn't intervened. He used that clip to control her. She hung her head in shame. I told him I would take her place. I was with him 3 days later, but it kept her safe. She was crying quietly. I just held her hand and thought about ways to make Stanley's life unbearable until he was gone. I couldn't help it. The tears started, and I pulled a chair up, holding her hand with one hand while stroking her hair and cheek with the other. The doctors decided to let her wake up to see if my presence would help. When she regained consciousness, Greta held one hand while I had the other, but I had dozed off. I woke when she tightened her grip, trying to make sure I was really there. The tears began to fall as she tried to speak around her feeding tube. One of the nurses removed it gently. Tommy, I need. I put my fingers on her lips and brushed her hair back from her face. You don't need to do anything but get well. You'll need your strength. We'll soon be chasing our daughter around, and you need to be able to keep up. If you promise not to do anything risky, I'll take off these restraints. I have a strong desire to hug you. She was crying, and Greta was crying. The two nurses were misty-eyed. They helped remove the restraints. She was so weak she needed help, but she ended up in my lap, holding tightly, still crying. I held her for 2 hours, only putting her back in bed when dinner arrived. Soup, mashed potatoes, and pureed vegetables with gelatin for dessert. It looked like baby food. I fed her, promising a kiss for every bite she took. She did her best to finish everything. I had a rocking chair brought into the room, and after dinner, I held and rocked her, giving her every kiss I promised and a few extra. Every time she tried to talk about what happened, I stopped her, saying we would discuss it when she had her strength back. She did manage to say, "I never cheated on you, Tommy. Never." That's why I wouldn't agree to the prenup, even though the evidence was quite compelling. She ate everything placed in front of her. If I had to leave, she became very agitated. I made sure Celeste, Greta, or Vivian was present. She had just about stopped crying when we allowed Amy to see her. There wasn't a dry eye in the room for 2 hours, including mine. They hugged fiercely. "Eve, I thought we lost you. Don't ever do that again. Ever. I love you." Eve reassured her. "Baby, I'm right here, and I'll never be far from you or the rest of the family again. I promise. Please stop crying. I've seen enough tears." She held Eve's hand and chatted for almost 2 hours, discussing everything from baby names to future plans. I took that as a sign to leave them alone. I took Greta and Vivian to the coffee house down the street, where they gave me an update. The grand jury is in. Stanley will likely die in prison if convicted of even half the charges. He will be surrounded by many people, though I doubt they see him as a friend right now. The lawyers have arranged for our testimony to be taken behind closed doors since we are the victims. I'd do it on network television if I thought it would get him another year, but we have to think about Eve. "Are you going to testify?" I reached out and took Greta's hand. "Yes," as loudly as possible. I want him held accountable. The baby arrived 2 weeks early. Her water broke as we were leaving the hospital. She tightened her grip on my hand. "Turn around, Tommy." I didn't understand. "Did you forget something?" Yes, I forgot. I'm having a baby. She's coming, honey." I totally freaked out, picking her up and rushing back through the doors. "The baby is coming. Help. The baby is coming." The duty nurse had seen it all. "Put her in this wheelchair. We'll handle it. You might as well come along." It doesn't look like she'll wait long. I stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand as she yelled and screamed through labor. She was in labor for less than 3 hours. Vivian Greta came into the world at 1:55 p.m. with a strong, clear cry, showcasing her vocal abilities. She was the loudest baby I had ever heard. They let me cut the cord, then took her to clean her up before handing her back to me. I had the great honor of placing my daughter on my wife's chest, and she soon began to nurse. Eve looked on in wonder before looking up at me. At that precise moment, I knew we were going to be just fine. I stroked her hair and joked, "You owe me 2 more, but I think we need to wait at least 2 years for the next one." "All right." Her eyes spoke volumes even though she couldn't speak. My whole family was in the waiting room, along with Greta. Vivian's husband arrived 2 hours later, and surprisingly, Jerry also came. They all went to the nursery to see her, marveling at her while I stood there bursting with pride. The women went into the room at feeding time. Greta held her first, followed by Vivian, then Celeste, and finally Amy. They had to almost pry her away from Amy, who was reluctant to let go. Eve was in therapy alone and with me for almost 2 years, and she still sees her therapist every 3 months. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. We were really uncomfortable around each other for a long time. When things would get tense, we developed a habit of going into the baby's room. We usually left holding hands and vowed almost every day to always talk and trust each other completely. We didn't resume our intimate life until Vivian was almost 7 months old. It was slow and tentative, like we were afraid the other would break, but it was beautiful and very fulfilling. Soon, our intimacy grew in intensity, and we were almost back to where we were before. Greta also went through a long period of therapy. In a clever move, she kept her money separate from Stanley, who thought her money would save him if things went wrong. It didn't work out that way. But a year later, she began seeing Jerry. 6 months later, he moved in, and 8 months later, they married. Vivian and Jerry were very active in their granddaughter's life, becoming her godparents. Greta's grandmother was the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, and her grandfather on the other side was the director of the State Bureau of Investigation. Talk about connections. Fred put in 20 years with the Sheriff's Department and retired. I made him a full partner, and he now runs the business for us. The political fallout from the scandal was enormous and continued for a long time as new information came out, damaging both parties. Jerry proved to be a relentless investigator, never giving up once he had a lead. There were several emergency elections in the following years. They appointed a political placeholder to take Stanley's seat, but he was so inept that he didn't get a nod from his party when his turn was up. The election was fiercely contested due to the addition of an independent candidate, me. I was interviewed at the beginning of the primary season, and I had no idea why. You know, the American Revolution was fought partly for financial reasons, taxation without representation, career politicians, etc. The Constitution was designed to discourage career politicians. You were supposed to leave your position after a term and let someone else take over. Now, unless you do something monumentally foolish like Stanley Wallace and his cronies, you have a high probability of being reelected. The system is broken again, and I don't see a way to fix it. The interviewer was intrigued. So, you're saying that in a perfect world, there would be no career politicians? I doubt it would be a perfect world, but it would probably be a lot better. He wouldn't let it go. So in a world like that, you'd run for office? I laughed. Maybe, but I'd be the world's worst politician. I'm too honest. I made a major mistake thinking that people wouldn't take my comments seriously. I was wrong. People I didn't know began calling me, asking if I would run. I steadfastly refused. Then, out of the blue, my old political team showed up: Billy Grant, Zane Williams, Jerry Smith, and of course Emerson. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. I looked at their grins and had a bad feeling. Hi boys. Long time no see. What's up? Thad grind. You are, baby. How would you like to be a state representative? I hugged them all and invited them in. We caught up. Billy was a political science teacher at a small university 2 states over. Zane and Jerry ran a think tank analyzing election prospects of various candidates, mostly for their parties. Their track record was 93%, with most failures due to scandals or undisclosed information by the candidate. They had also set up a small investigation service for in-house use. Emerson, a political consultant, had successfully managed the campaigns of 5 state officials, 3 U.S. senators, and 2 congressmen. His record was 11-3. Eve greeted them warmly, remembering better days. They loved the baby. Billy was married and had 2 children. Zane was divorced with no children. Jerry was gay and didn't have a permanent partner. Regarding what you asked earlier, my answer is no. Why would I want to return to that world after everything it put us through? They had clearly considered this because it gives you a chance to show people how to do things differently. This is a golden opportunity to return the government to the people. Don't say no right away. Discuss it with each other and your closest friends, and see what they think. What do you have to lose? I have thought it through as well. Peace of mind is important. You guys no doubt read about what we went through. You weren't here, so you really don't know what it was like. I turned to Eve. Surely you don't think this is a good idea? She looked deeply into my eyes. I think it's an excellent idea. What kind of world would this be for our children if someone doesn't take a stand and show them that there are decent people trying to make their future better? It would do me a world of good personally. Sort of an atonement for past mistakes, balancing the books for my family, so to speak. I never thought I would have this conversation. After a couple of hours, they convinced me to ask around. Vivian was all for it, as were John, Greta, and Jerry. My family, especially Celeste, thought it was an excellent idea. So, 3 weeks later, we had to form a party. Why? I asked. Why can't it just run as an independent? Jerry explained it would send the wrong message. Even with the grand fight, you were part of a group of like-minded individuals. You need to give them something to believe and to draw them out. Otherwise, you'd come off as a bitter loner with no chance. Eve listened with interest. Sometimes I forget how smart and politically savvy she is. They're right. I've been thinking and I have some suggestions, she said. Your basic premise in the interview was that career politicians are a bad idea. Build on that. Push the idea that a person should have one chance to do the right thing before making way for someone with fresh ideas. She sighed. Besides, I don't think I could stand being a politician's wife for more than 1 term. So we took her idea and ran with it, forming the One Chance Party. Bill started a viral campaign, broadcasting bits of our theory and launching a website. The premise was simple. If you were a politician at the state level or above, you had to pledge to serve only 1 term. If you were a voting member, you had to pledge not to support any candidate who runs more than once. Our motto became, serve with pride and integrity, leave with dignity and honor. It was funded with Eve's money, and was just the grassroots movement, not formally registered with any candidate running. So we could spend as much as we wanted. After a month, with 25,000 signatures, the minimum needed to establish a party, we went public and registered, announcing my candidacy for the office of state senator in the 9th District. It caught the political establishment by surprise, and they scrambled to block it. But thanks to FAD's group and the LLI with JN at the helm, they couldn't. In light of the federal scandal involving the Tea Party, they didn't try very hard, considering us a nuisance. Our lawyers kept us in line, being scrupulously attentive to detail. The seat money was ours, but soon we had donations coming in. It was explained to everyone that any amount over $100 would be posted on our site, so anyone could see who our supporters were. Greta, Vivian, and John gave the largest legally allowable donation possible. Amy was one of our first donors, giving $25 from her babysitting money through Celeste. Because I was registered, I was able to attend and participate in any debate. I was always third, but used it to my advantage. During the first debate, I stayed quiet until the Republican opponent pushed me on what I would do about certain state problems. Probably very little at first. I planned to take the first year to learn. After that, I'll probably make a lot of noise. In a later debate, I challenged them on their party records. "Sir," I said to my Republican opponent, "last year your party voted a straight ticket 8 times out of 10 nationally and locally. Do you agree with that statement?" He had to, as it was public knowledge. The Democrats snickered. I turned to him and said, "And you, sir, your party voted a straight ticket 9 times out of 10. Do you agree with this statement?" He had to admit it. "Then, sir, I need to ask, if you were both working for your parties, who was working for the American people?" They couldn't provide an answer, and applause brought the debate to a standstill. The party was growing rapidly, with other states starting their own branches. We made sure they agreed to the tenets of our party. I was campaigning, doing radio and television ads in limited numbers, and had picked a key phrase for my last debate. Bill flooded billboards with it. "Who was working for the American people? Call your representatives and ask them. If you don't like their answers, go to onchanceparty.com. The response was overwhelming, and our numbers grew significantly. Even Greta supported me during the campaign. Initially, they were concerned, but I insisted. By now, most details of their past had been revealed. They needed to see that, while we may regret our past, we were looking towards the future. It might hurt me, but I'm not ashamed of either of you, and I'm really going to need you by my side. Greta was invaluable. Her insights were spot on. Despite her years as a political spouse, she had learned a few things. Vivian and Jerry had to stay away for obvious reasons, but they still appeared during dinners and offered their support. I made it clear to the press right away that the past was just that, the past. Anyone who made comments or asked questions anyway ended up at the bottom of the list during question time. They got the message and stopped quickly. Amy was now in junior high and discovered that the One Chance Party had been excluded from a mock election at her school. She went all the way to the school board in protest, which caught the attention of local reporters. The school was forced to allow the party, and Amy ran, winning with 60% of the vote. The advertising was invaluable to us. In the end, I was declared the winner before 75% of the precincts were in. I received 880,000 more votes than the registered members of my party. The national media gave us considerable attention. You may remember my term. I certainly received a lot of attention for exposing waste and corruption, and refusing to make deals unless they were in the best interests of my district and state. When it was over, I did indeed return home. Despite pleas from all over the state, I graciously refused. In my farewell speech, I thanked everyone who believed in me and reminded them of the promise I made at the start. Our little party became a nationwide, established third party. One state was discredited after allowing 2 state and 2 federal candidates to run again under our party banner. Billboards went up all over that state, showing the candidates with the word liar over each face, urging people to visit the website and view the pledge forms with their signatures. They all lost, 2 rejoined their old parties, and 2 disappeared from public life. Was our system of government better because of it? History will have to be the judge. After I left the office, I visited a medium-security prison downstate. I was surprised to see him. He was thinner, most of his hair was gone, and what remained was almost white. I knew he had been beaten up a few times. His tough on-crime stance was well known, and there were probably inmates in every prison who had their sentences extended because of his policies. He shuffled over and sat down. I saw the cup mark on his cheek and knew what it meant. It seems he and a lifer had developed a relationship over the past 3 years and were still a couple. "Come to gloat," he sneered, but there was no real anger in it. "No. If I never see you again, it will be too soon. You're the lowest of the low in my opinion. I used to wish you'd die, but after thinking about it, I'm glad you'll be here for the rest of your life. I hope you have many years left." I sighed. Your wife and daughter sent me. They wanted me to show you something. I pulled out a photo of Greta and Jerry taken on the beach during their second anniversary cruise. Even at her age, she looked fantastic in a bikini. This could have been you if you had shown her the least amount of love. He didn't flinch, but his eyes tightened. I held up a 5x7 photo of his first granddaughter Vivian on her 3rd birthday. She was on Eve's lap, trying to smear birthday cake on her mother's face. They were both laughing. She was over 4 years old now. I held up another photo of a small boy sleeping in my lap just before his birthday. This is your grandson, Thomas. We call him Deuce. I held up another formal picture of Eve with the kids, her 7-month-old belly showing. I handed him a sonogram. And this is your second granddaughter, Amy. Celeste and Eve wanted you to see these to know that despite what you did to her and her mom, they ended up happy, normal, supported, and cherished by good people. She wanted you to know what you could have had if you had been a decent person. I got up to leave. I had honored her request and wasn't staying a minute longer. As I was walking away, I heard something. I looked back. He was still sitting at the table, crying. He looked up and in a broken voice, begged me to leave the photos and the sonogram of the kids. I started to refuse, but decided it would cause him even more pain to remind him of what could have been. When he died 7 years later, his cell wall was covered with every photo I sent him. Eve was informed of his death and refused to claim the body or attend his cremation. I have no idea what happened to the ashes. In the end, he got his due, and I had my life back.